in this story. Now you see, since June of this year to now, there have been 1,000 media hits about health professionals and torture. Because of our reported experiments in torture, because of the licensing complaints, because of the legislation, 1,000 hits in 14 days, 2 editorials in the New York Times. We actually at one point in June ran out of media to do, but it was not like that in 2006. In 2006, we had no coverage. We had, Jane Mayer's 2005 piece, The Experiment. We had a New England Journal of Medicine article by Jonathan Marks and Greg Block. But those were few and far between. We're talking months between hits. Now, this is a known issue. This is seen as central to the issue of torture. But back then, editors and reporters saw it as a sideshow. That psychologists were not the designers, the supervisors, the implementers, the activators of the OLC's legal cover. Psychologists were just another way to tell the story. They were monitors. The guy in the white coat standing in the room saying, don't go that far, don't go this far. They were seen as accomplices, not as the direct perpetrators. And so at that time, Mark Benjamin really was the first to begin to try to take the APA's position and look through the lens of the people who crafted that position. Individuals like Larry James, Colonel Larry James, who has now had an ethics complaint filed against him recently in Ohio. Scott Shuman, who was present at the black site in Thailand when Abu Zubaydah was being tortured in 2002. Individuals such as Colonel Morgan Banks, who we now know through the Senate Armed Services Committee report, trained the behavioral science consultative teams at Psychological Applications Director at Fort Bragg. I can go on and on. But the point is, Mark gave us what we needed to go to New Orleans. He punched our ticket to go to New Orleans. And what he did is, in that story, set off a debate that put that guy, Dr. Stephen Reisner, and I don't know why the hell you volunteered for this, to go and basically debate the Army Surgeon General, Kevin Kiley. And it was there in New Orleans where we first met as a group. And we began to put the pieces together. We saw a woman in a uniform named Colonel Deborah Dunham. And we saw her give a hug and a kiss to a man. And that man was Dr. Russ Newman, the director of clinical practice, her husband. And it struck us in hearing about what was happening in the Pence process that it was considered ethical by some stretch of the imagination, which even now causes me to drool and to go, that it was okay that the husband of a senior biscuit and now full-bird colonel in the U.S. military could sit in a process that would create the professional standard for his wife. And let's talk about that. And this is something that I criticize myself about not doing a good job of communicating since the beginning. Why does the APA matter to the U.S. military and the CIA? It matters for one central reason. In over 30 states, the APA Ethics Code is a direct part of licensing requirements. Underneath a set of CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, in the U.S. military, so underneath the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and as part of the Code of Federal Regulations for civil servants in the CIA, say that 3 times fast, civil servants. The requirement is for those psychologists, all health professionals, who are military or intelligence, to be licensed in the U.S. state. If you want a psychologist to engage in an act that would violate their ethics code, it has an operational impact on your ability to employ them inside the military or intelligence setting, because it would be a licensure violation that thus violates the Code of Federal Regulations. So without the APA in the ballgame, you could not have done the torture. There are 5 things that should have prevented the psychologist's role. 1, the Geneva Convention. We saw what happened to that. 2, ethics. We saw what happened to that. 1.02, 8.05, 8.07. The critical bulwarks against taking a lawful order, lawful, that contradicts your ethics code was taken out. The stopgaps against participating in research without consent, taken out. And that was taken out by August 2002, when the U memo is completed. It goes into effect in 2003. But by 2002, when the program officially, the month the program officially began, according to the OLC memos, the ethics code had been changed just as it would have been required to be able to have this second part, ethics, not be a problem. Third, the Code of Federal Regulations. And that just doesn't relate to participation with licensure standing. It relates to this. It relates to research, to the common rule. The common rule is part of the Code of Federal Regulations governing human subject research. As we laid out in Experiments in Torture, the activities that health professionals engaged in at the CIA black sites violate the Code of Federal Regulations. And as we currently read the APA Ethics Code, it actually violates the APA Ethics Code as currently written, even in its weakened form. But there are still many questions with that. There have been changes that we're currently researching to U.S. criminal statute, criminal code, 10 U.S.C. 980, related to improper use of DoD research funds. A waiver has been put into 10 U.S.C. 980, and we don't know why. The Weinberger Directive, which had codified research ethics for DoD, was changed in March of 2002 to become the Wolfowitz Directive, which changes the language to Nuremberg familiarity, where previously in the Wilson Directive had been adherence. So something has happened to the Code of Federal Regulations. We still don't know all the answers, but we see changes. And those changes relate to applications for health professionals. Additionally, what should have prevented them is basically customary international law. As we now know from the Office of Professional Responsibility report, customary international law was found prior to the Hamdan decision not to apply to detainee treatment. What does that mean in real terms for health professionals? It means Nuremberg was found. If you say all customary international law doesn't apply, then that's where Nuremberg exists in U.S. law as customary international law. So basically, all those things stood in the way of a health professional participating. And all those things were somehow weakened or changed, suspended, eliminated. And little did we know back in 2006 that we weren't just fighting the APA. We were fighting the APA as a microcosm of a broader assault on health professional ethics, on the law, U.S. law, and on international law itself.